privilege to be here, and a lot of people I think I've met in the past. It's funny, right? So I've been working on AI for the past 20 years at various different capacities. And when ChatGPT launched, I saw something funny happen in my LinkedIn feed. Suddenly, every person was becoming an AI expert. And the funniest thing was, like, people who were talking about blockchain were now talking about AI. So hopefully this content is something that you won't find on social media. This is actually a very, very important topic. And so having been at companies where AI was implemented without a lot of guardrails, and having seen some of the issues that AI can do, especially in social media in the past few years, we've learned a lot of lessons, and that's what motivated us to be on this journey. So hopefully, this is going to be interesting and inspiring for many of you as you think about this next big revolution. Let's see. So what's going on here, right? So I think I've probably lived through most of these digital transformations in the last 20 years. I remember when the iPhone launched, how like every company shifted towards app development. And I think ChatGPT launch in many ways is like the iPhone launch. Overnight, many teams are thinking about how do I implement generative AI, and as the previous speaker was saying, how do we refactor our existing software to be AI-based software? That's actually what's happening. And we are seeing exciting results already. We are seeing businesses that are essentially based on generative AI take off like crazy. Like we're seeing marketing companies post amazing numbers, hundreds of millions of ARR within a couple of years of the inception of their startups. It's a very, very interesting time for people to work on generative AI, create new applications. Even for people, many of us, when ChatGPT launched, it was somewhat magical, right? Like, how it actually answered those questions in almost a way that a human being was answering it. But there are a lot of trust issues that still remain, right? These are concerns that we need to solve for before AI, really takes even more leaps, and before those, trillion, parameter models, start running in production everywhere. And that's basically what the focus of our talk going to be. Before I go into it, I don't want to scare this audience. I'm sure a lot of people have been tracking, what has been happening in AI and machine learning even before generative AI. And there were some costly disasters that have happened when companies were running at large scale, even simple machine learning models without a lot of guardrails, without a lot of checks and balances, whether that's for anti-money laundering or fraud detection or credit scoring cases, especially in a lot of banking companies had to go through a lot of these risks and putting their businesses at risk, putting their reputation at risk, undergoing regulatory risk, And we're seeing these stories emerge. We've seen a big credit card company go through alleged gender bias issues a few years ago. We've seen a big housing real estate company go through machine learning models going wrong, mispredicting house prices, affecting their business. And so these were happening in the more traditional or the predictive AI world. Now one can imagine what are all the potential problems we can see when generative AI, this new form of AI, will go into production. And so the other thing that's happening is, we are seeing governments wake up, right? We are seeing like EU AI Act in a draft. We are seeing, the Algorithmic Accountability Act. We're seeing the whole AI, Bill of Rights coming through. So there will be AI regulation. Sam Altman keeps talking about AI regulation. Every time he makes a post on AI regulation, we see like, number of visitors coming to Fiddler AI, go up. But really, what are the things that people are concerned about generative AI? In my opinion, the risk aperture for AI has just increased many-fold with generative AI. Early on, you might have thought that, okay, AI is something, not a deterministic piece of thing, its predictions can change over time, or it's a black box, we can't really understand how it works, or it can potentially cause biased decisions. Now, AI can actually plainly utter bullshit. It can hallucinate, it can basically say incorrect things in a completely coherent manner. And it can actually be very deceiving for humans. And how do you then put it into a workflow that basically where a business process needs to rely on facts? So correctness and hallucinations are a huge problem today. We have seen AI actually say unsafe things and toxic things. We have seen like Bing Sydney chatbot actually say utter things like you have to commit suicide to the end users. We don't want these type of things in an enterprise setting. Imagine a robo-advisor providing portfolio decisions for a wealth management use case in a bank, providing these type of suggestions to the end users. So these are a lot of concerns that we don't really have any guardrails for. If one is fine-tuning OpenAI or any of these open source language models, you really don't get these things out of the box, right? Between an AI model and your AI applications, all of these questions remain unanswered. So literally, one is flying blind. I'm going to walk through some of these things in a little bit more detail. So number one concern, as someone mentioned, is like privacy, right? These large language models can memorize data. So if you're fine-tuning a large language model with your own data set, that data that you're fine-tuning with could be memorized by it. In fact, people have shown how to retrieve that exactly. So in this case, this is actually a generative AI image model that one was fine-tuning, and with this person's image. And when you can actually retrieve the same image or similar image by uttering like her name. And so we have seen this happen over and over. In the case of text-based models, if you have PII data, that's actually going into a large language model. There is no isolation here. Even though large cloud companies say that we are giving an isolated large language model cluster for you, there's absolutely no isolation. There's no isolated large language model one is getting. There's one unified large language model where everyone's PII data is going into it. And so it can be retrieved by prompt injections and adversarial attacks on it. So there's a huge concern for enterprises when it comes to data privacy in terms of fine-tuning these large language models. The second thing is hallucinations. This was an interesting piece of thing that we discovered recently. We were doing a conference on responsible AI, and we invited a well-known researcher, Ricardo Yates. He's been an AI researcher for Yahoo and numerous companies for a number of years. And when ChatGPT launched, it pronounced him dead. And so he was searching for his name and basically, and then the next version sort of kept him alive, and the next version again pronounced him dead. And so there's inconsistencies in terms of how these large language models produce data. Because remember, these are not truly intelligent machines, right? They're essentially predicting the next token. They have just scoured the web, and they've become very good at predicting the next set of words that they want to write based on what you're prompting. And they're tuned to be coherent, but they're not really understanding the knowledge and producing this information. So this is a very, very important thing one needs to observe here. The other part of it is like, this sort of lack of transparency. No one can say how a large language model is coming up with content. If one asks a question, around like, Wayne Rooney shot from the outside of the 18, does this sentence, is it plausible? Now, depending on how you ask the question, the same language model can say it's plausible, can also say it's not plausible. So if you slightly tweak the question, the answer will change dramatically. You really cannot know where it's plucking the answer from. There is no attribution. There is absolutely no interpretability in terms of which data sources it's actually scouring to get these answers. And this is a huge problem if one is trying to productionize generative AI in a use case where you are expected to provide these attributions. The fourth big problem is bias, right? And we are living in a society which is not a perfectly equitable society. We have web created by the privileged class. The internet is documented by the privileged class that has been exposed to education and mostly English language. And that is the web that is being fed to these large language models. So there's inherently huge amount of bias. If you ask a question, two Muslims walked into as a prompt, immediately it can answer like the whole Texas cartoon contest and the fire incident. So it can be really biased in terms of how it can answer and respond to these things. And this is a very, very important topic when we want to productionize generative AI to consider. Now, so when you put all of these things together, the sort of the top 4 enterprise goals for a CXO seem to be, how do I make this generative AI? How do I take this innovation to my customers? How do I do this in a way that I'm protecting the brand reputation of my company? I'm protecting the customer loyalty, not pissing off my customers. I'm still growing my business through responsible AI. So these are some things that one needs to remember putting in. So we believe that AI observability is a way to solve these problems. And so the way to think about AI observability is, there are basically 3 big stacks in AI. If you look at it from a first principles perspective. There's a data layer. Without data, you can't really build AI. And we have seen in the past 15 years, a lot of innovation happen within warehousing data, processing data, transforming it, labeling it. And there's a lot of technologies available today. And then there's the modeling layer, which is where a lot of innovation is happening today with pre-trained models, open source language models, platforms that provide ability to train your own models. But even if you got those models and if you spend a lot of money buying those GPUs, spending money on hiring data scientists, ML engineers, prompt engineers, you cannot really productionize these models at scale without observability. And that's because you really cannot control these concerns that I just talked about. And that's where AI observability comes in. You really have to have this layer to make these models interpretable, to set up guardrails around AI, to really unlock that business value. And that's essentially what we are seeing in the last few years as like the AI, sort of AI workloads take off amongst these customers. So I'm going to talk about a few case studies, how AI observability sort of helps our customers these days. But before that, there are 4 things that AI observability can do for you. Number one is companies invest a lot of money in buying GPUs, training these models, hiring people to deploy them, right? The goal is to keep this model performing the way you expect it to be. And that's actually one of the most important things a model monitoring system can offer. The second thing is to be able to control your costs. We have seen when AI can go wrong, how costly it can be from a business point of view, from a reputation point of view. How can you actually reduce those errors and reduce those costs? And third thing is the topic of this talk, being responsible and sort of being able to govern your AI. And number 4 is having a way to create transparency across your organization, not just for the data teams, but for your operations stakeholders, for your auditing stakeholders, for your business stakeholders. Everyone wants to understand how your AI is working. And so, I don't want to say all is everything is like doom's world today. There's a lot of opportunity when it comes to generative AI, and we are seeing a lot of applications crop up, especially in financial services space. We are seeing people building stock advisors, robo-advisors for their end users. We are seeing internal Q&A tools being developed for policy documentation, a lot of innovation on marketing and customer support use cases. There's a huge opportunity across sectors, from banking into retail, product recommendations. We work with retail companies where they're using embeddings to improve their product recommendations, and they're using generative AI to improve their supply chain, supply chain workflows. And then even in pharma, right, to be able to produce legal documents, to be able to craft summaries of these legal documents, risk documentation. There's a lot of opportunity amongst multiple of these different verticals. So the goal of it is to be able to unlock this value through implementing this AI in a responsible manner. And that's basically, hopefully all of us, in a sort of, go towards, right? So how do we think about responsible AI in a way that can be put into practice? Because a lot of people talk about responsible AI from a principles perspective. Yeah, you shouldn't have bias. Your models should be interpretable and whatnot. So here's a framework that we believe could work, where you start with like your monitoring of your models, your validation of your models, your sort of benchmarking and stress testing of your models, and you have some way for your stakeholders to understand AI through easy to use reports. You have some sort of governance in place for your stakeholders to understand AI. And that's basically what we have been building at Fiddler. Essentially, there are three pillars to it, right? So there's the pillar to making sure that your models are performant, you're reducing costs and increasing your ROI, and you're essentially making your models more responsible. And we are excited. We've been around for 5 years, and we come to work because there is this like two-pronged mission, right? So we are in one way in helping AI teams deploy these models in a responsible and trustworthy manner. We are a neutral third party, so we are not an OpenAI, we are not a Microsoft to ratify our own models. So we are a third party audit, providing you with this unbiased point of view of those models. And then the second thing that excites us, and I think a lot of people here as well, is that we have a huge opportunity to transform society with AI, and I think we have a responsibility to do it in a manner that is good, right? That's good for society. And I think that's what excites us. And if you have more questions, we are here. So if you want to reach out to us, please reach out to Krishna at Fiddler AI.